Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor. How have you been enjoying this heat wave?
Oh, is it a heat wave? There's certainly heat waves in other parts of the world.
That's true.
In Delhi, I understand the monsoon hasn't yet arrived, which means that the weather is absolutely intolerable.
God.
But still, people are still there. We all worry about the heat, but I think that we can survive much worse heat than we get so far. We're told also that the Arctic is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the world.
Right.
And that how many days? 6 days are knocked off the time it takes for the Russian supply ships to get from Murmansk to somewhere in. Is it to Australia or Singapore or somewhere like that?
I think it's Singapore. Yeah, that polar route is going to become much more lucrative now.
Yeah, and of course then we'll have something else to fight over, which is the resources that used to be under the ice that we couldn't get at before.
That's true. That's true. And the Canadians will have to increase their military budget. Canadian taxpayers will have to pay more. It becomes local issues.
Yeah, but that Northwest Passage through the islands, the Canadian islands, looks like a possibility for the first time since that man, what was his name, Frobisher or something like that?
Well, we'll have to resurrect people like Henry Hudson and all those people.
Yeah.
Who were searching for generations.
So it's exciting in the long term, but in the short term, I think what we've got to worry about is what's going on in Syria more than anything else. Even though there are other places that are warming up, like Nagorno-Karabakh in the Caucasus, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which seems to be bad again. I don't really know what triggered that. But the point that I wanted to make was that not only is every conflict now a global conflict, which I think we've had occasion to notice before, but that they become more and more difficult to resolve as time goes on, simply because more and more people get involved in the decision making, because more and more people finish up having interests in the outcome, and it's so difficult, if not impossible, to get everybody to agree. And so in the situation in the Syria conflict at the moment makes it very difficult to understand how a resolution can ever be worked out. It's difficult to see how China, Russia, the Arab League, the European Union, and America, and Saudi Arabia, and for that matter, the other neighboring countries that are involved, are ever going to manage to come together on a final resolution, because the more people are involved, obviously the harder it is to get agreement. And that's probably going to be the mark of this sort of thing from in the future.
I would agree with that, and I would also point out that even with this smaller subset of interested parties whom you just enumerated, having been called out of the theoretically larger group, i.e. the United Nations, right, which seems to be totally incapable of handling something like this. If you take a smaller subset of interested parties and take them out and say, all right, let's try to solve this, we still can't end up with any progress insofar as a reasonable path to resolve the situation. And meanwhile, the neighboring countries, the Arab League, as we were chatting about before we went on the air, are very upset that the so-called plan does not include the removal of Assad.
This is the problem. Can we have a resolution without the removal of Assad? And can we have a resolution that would remove Assad that would not, that would be acceptable to the people who are currently in control?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that what we're going to learn from this is that essentially the solution is going to have to be worked out on the ground.
Meaning internal to Syria?
Not necessarily totally internal to Syria, because there's so many other people that are not Syrian involved in this anyway, supplying arms.
Yes.
Apart from whatever else is going on that we don't know about. And of course, there's the Turks on the border that are making services available to the rebels. But nevertheless, I can't see how in situations like this, where more and more people get involved in any larger decision making, it's very unlikely that there will be any consensus that would be agreeable to both parties on the ground. Mm-hmm. Which means that, in fact, in the short to medium term, the fighting can only be affected by what is happening on the ground, whoever is there. And it's amazing how many people are there. There's a large number of correspondents. You can turn on the BBC at any time and get new news from people who are actually wandering about. Mm-hmm. And they're all, after all, they're on the ground, but they're making available information which is selective to anybody who will listen, which is affecting public opinion, which then feeds back on what's going on the ground.
Let's go through that list of people who may be there. That's an interesting point. The Russians are clearly there. They have a naval base there, and they have military attaches throughout the Syrian military.
And 20,000 Russian wives of Syrians.
Oh my, I had missed that. That's quite.
I think I've got that figure right. It was an enormous figure in something I read this morning.
That's quite a constituency.
So many Syrians have studied in Moscow and married Russian wives and taken them back to Syria.
Oh my. I'd have to think about that. That could be the plot for a novel, actually. That's very interesting. And then of course, you have, as referenced in the last time we talked, there was that article in the New York Times about the United States intelligence agency's effort to develop assets within Syria, apparently successfully. I guess they're running them from southern Turkey. And then, of course, there's the Turks themselves, who are absolutely irate over the downing of that plane, that have moved their military up to just about at the border now, just daring the Syrians to do anything.
Which the CIA says was actually not in Syrian in Turkish airspace when it was downed.
Right, right.
The Turks won't acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. One wonders whether the Syrian border with Iraq is totally irrelevant to all this, and with Jordan. And for that matter, with Israel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because we don't hear anything about those borders. We know that there's a lot going on between Syria and Lebanon, and that Lebanon is a gateway to anything else. As long as it's possible to go back and forth between Syria and Lebanon, presumably anybody can go in and out.
Mm-hmm. What is the Saudi concern?
The Saudi concern is that Assad is not a Sunni, and is part of the Shia camp generally, which is on Iran's side, which is in conflict with Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and potentially in the whole eastern province of Saudi Arabia.
Correct. Right. Right.
Now there are other issues as well, but in the larger context within which everything is being decided, I think it's that Shia-Sunni situation again.
I don't see any resolution for this. It's really a heartbreaking situation. I mean, it's just going to go on.
But it's strange because the Shia have been gaining power since Khomeini, mm-hmm. And doing so in a way that looked as though it was long term. But now they're really at a disadvantage, and if they do lose the situation in Syria, it probably will change for the next generation, the Shia-Sunni balance in the Middle East. And I imagine that's what's at the basis of the thinking of Saudi Arabia and probably some of the other Muslim neighbors. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask a hypothetical question. Typically, the only true predictable reaction in the Middle East is what happens if somebody poses a direct threat to Israel, in that one can be relatively sure that they will react. Does this, other than just disrupting the scenery and the balance of power, so to speak, potentially, does this present any threat to Israel, what's going on in Syria?
That's an interesting point because the Israeli situation is very sensitive and is in the balance and has been since the beginning of the Arab Spring, and it's still not clear what the relationship is going to be between Israel and the new Egypt.
Correct.
Netanyahu apparently wrote a personal letter to Morsi, and I haven't heard that there's been a reply yet.
Mm-hmm.
The Rahimi, the Ahmadinejad's vice president, went out of his way to annoy Israel the other day with stating that the Talmud is at the base of everybody's problems throughout the world. That certainly isn't going to help things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it'll do for the next election in Iran, but it won't help anything beyond that.
How closely aligned is Damascus to Tehran in the event that the West acted against Tehran? Would that provoke some sort of answer or reverberation in Syria?
They have become close to each other simply because everybody's against each of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it useful for them to help each other. Syria has been an important place of pilgrimage for Iranians beyond Iraq, especially over the last generation or so. But they are, after all, not neighboring countries. And it's easy enough for Iranians to go through Turkey to get to Syria, but they don't have an immediate neighborly situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, no, I think it's a question of everybody needing allies, and Iran only has Syria, and Syria only has Iran.
Well, you know who has impressed me immensely during this whole process is the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan. He's not minced words, and he seems to be ready to, if unleashed, so to speak, he seems to be ready to take action.
Yes, but he's a Sunni, he's an autocrat, his journalists are in prison, and he has an agenda. And especially if this plane wasn't actually in Turkish airspace when it was shot down, one wonders whether he is a good bet for resolution. Because the Turks are setting out to take over where the Ottoman Empire left off, which isn't a bad idea, but obviously the Ottoman Empire wasn't popular when it faded away, and so it needs to be done very carefully. And Erdogan, it's reckoned that Turkey is going to be, what was it, the 9th largest economy in the world next year?
Yes.
Got that number right? So Erdogan has done very well, but I wonder whether he isn't overplaying his role at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just thinking back in the 60s and 70s, the way, and the early 80s, actually just 60s and 70s, the way the Shah of Iran was propped up by the West and by the U.S. in particular as the policeman in that region of the world. And I'm just wondering if somebody's trying to step into their shoes in some way.
Yes, but the Shah didn't have much competition.
No, he did not. No, that's a good point.
Now there's a lot of competition. So I think that even though we need to take history into account in working out what's going on at the moment, I think the scene has changed significantly since then, and the competition at the moment between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey is a difficult competition and is being watched very carefully by all the other countries there.
Not to change the topic too much, and I don't know that much about this. I only quickly saw the headline about the desecration of Sufi Muslim sites in
Timbuktu.
Yes, yes. What can you talk a bit about that?
The Wahhabis in Arabia have always been against shrines.
Mm-hmm.
And as Wahhabi ideas have spread into fundamentalist, politically oriented sects as far east as Afghanistan and now as far west as Mali, one of the first things they wanted to do is to get rid of shrines. And essentially they don't respect history. Except in the respect for the life of the Prophet, but not historical buildings. And they think that it's against the Islamic principle of Tawheed, focusing on the oneness of God, to pay too much attention to a particular symbol, material symbol of anything Islamic. And so it's similar to same sort of thing that's happened in many other places, and it's even not totally unrelated to what the Taliban did with the Buddha statues in Afghanistan. But it's really unfortunate because Timbuktu will lose its tourist value.
Yeah, yeah.
And it needs it.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
Have we come to the end of our 50?
I think we might have. We've got a nice, concise, wrapped up statement here. Good.
Well, I'm sure the world will be even more exciting next week.
Well, thank you, Professor, and we'll talk to you soon.